Hello, my name is Kevin Hirsch, and in this podcast we'll be talking about Camelina and Camelina research. The Diverse Field Crop Cluster is an agri-science cluster whose purpose is to support the research and development of 5 high-potential special crops. Those 5 crops are carinata, sunflower, mustard, flax, and Camelina. Here to talk about the Diverse Field Crop Cluster research on Camelina is Christina Eynck. I've practiced that and I screwed up. Should I just go back to the beginning of that sentence?
Hop right into that, yeah.
Yep.
Cut it out.
Eynck.
Here to talk about the Diverse Field Crop Cluster research on Camelina is Christina Eynck with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Saskatoon. Christina, first of all, Camelina is not a crop that all producers are familiar with. Give us the thumbnail sketch. It's my understanding that it looks a bit like flax, but it's actually in the brassica family.
Yeah, that's true. So Camelina is an oilseed that originated in the steppe regions of southeastern Europe and southwestern Asia, which is a region which has a very similar climate to what we have here on the Canadian prairies. That's one reason why Camelina is actually a good fit here. And you're right, it is a cousin of canola and mustard. But, some farmers have actually called it a hybrid between canola and flax, which I'm horrified by. But the reason why they say it, and one of the common names of Camelina is false flax, and that is because the seed pods of Camelina look somewhat like the seed pods of flax. And also in its evolutionary history, it actually was introduced as a crop as a weed in flax. So it has connections to flax. So it's an oilseed. It has a very, very old history of cultivation. Paleobotanica records go back 3,000 years ago. Was actually an established crop in the Bronze and the Iron Age. Was used as a culinary oil. It was used as a lamp oil, of all things, and as an animal fodder. Another name of Camelina is gold of pleasure, and that's because the Romans used it as a massage oil. So then it moved into Europe, and then in the middle of the 20th century, it really lost its importance with the introduction of rapeseed, because rapeseed was, for one, much higher yielding, and people actually knew what to do with rapeseed oil, whereas back then they didn't really know what to do with Camelina oil. In Germany, where I'm from, there was always a small acreage of Camelina, and they used to call Camelina the rapeseed of the sandy soils. So, and I would say in the early 2000s, people got interested in Camelina again, and that is, for one, because it has a number of nice agronomic attributes, and also a unique seed oil, which has both a high content of unsaturated fatty acids, but also a high content of antioxidants. So that's it in a nutshell, I would say.
So is it mainly an edible oil, or is it the biofuel potential really what's driving research and interest?
So for one, so what's mainly driving the interest right now is the biofuels. But Camelina can be used in a wide variety of applications. Actually, right now in Canada, the main market for Camelina is as an edible oil. It's a very healthy oil. It has a very good ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. It's also used and very popular as an omega-3 supplement for companion animals, for horses and dogs. The oil also is approved by CFIA as a 100% fish oil replacement. So that's a huge market. Aquaculture is huge. A byproduct of the crushing process is the meal. And the meal is approved by CFIA for broilers and chicken. No, not broilers and chickens, but broilers and layers. And so for both of those, when you feed Camelina meal, you can actually have elevated levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the eggs and in the thigh meat, for example, and you can make an omega claim for that. So it's all of it: food, feed, and industrial applications, also cosmetics.
And it's considered a somewhat lower input crop than some other crops, and it does well on more marginal soils.
Yeah, so I have to admit, I don't really like the term low input crop. I like to call it a low maintenance crop. So because early on, Camelina was touted as a crop that wouldn't require any inputs. And I mean, well, unless you're a pulse, you do require nitrogen. So that wasn't really true. However, it does really well on marginal land. It likes sandy soils. It actually, in trials that myself and other people have done previously, it has a competitive advantage to crops like canola on very sandy soils. The other thing is, while the seed costs are much, much lower than for a crop like canola, also it has resistance to a number of diseases and pests that are a problem in other brassica crops. It's, for example, a non-host to blackleg disease. So we don't need to worry about that in terms of fungicides. And what is really, really exciting about Camelina is that it is resistant to flea beetles. So it's like flea beetles don't even see it. So no insecticide applications necessary. So, and like the most important operation is really seeding. Seed is very small, so you have to pay attention that you put it in shallow. But if you have a good stand, you really, just let it grow, and there's not much else to do before you take it off again.
What about weed control?
Yeah, so that's certainly one of the challenges in Camelina. Obviously, grassy weed control is not a problem at all. So until recently, we were not able to control broadleaf weeds in stand. You could be somewhat cynical. You could say, well, that's one of the good things about Camelina. It's really easy to control. Like our Camelina volunteers are really easy to control because it basically doesn't tolerate any broadleaf herbicides. So any broadleaf herbicides had to be applied pre-emergence. Products like Edge and Command 306, the group 3s, are registered in Camelina. However, a couple of years ago, a small Saskatchewan-based company called Smart Earth Camelina released the world's first herbicide-tolerant Camelina variety, which has commercially acceptable levels of tolerance to SUs, Pinnacle SG. So for one, that helps to control weeds in stand. A lot of people are critical about group 2s because so many weeds have already developed tolerance to group 2s. However, in Camelina, it actually is really, really useful for two reasons. For one, it helps to control the Roundup Ready canola that comes up as a volunteer. And the other thing is that Camelina is very, very susceptible to group 2 herbicide carryover. So you can't grow it in a year after group 2s have been applied. And that has really, really limited the acreage that is available for Camelina. So here, that has really helped. And that variety is available under the name New Gold.
Now you mentioned Smart Earth Camelina, but there's been an evolution there. They've been bought out?
Yeah. So my group at AFC has had a very long-standing collaboration with Smart Earth. They were really the ones that initiated that first interest in Camelina. But in December of last year, they were bought out by Bayer Crop Science. Their breeding program, I should say. Smart Earth still exists. They still sell the oil for companion animal markets. But their breeding program was bought by Bayer Crop Science. So we are now working with a totally different beast. It's been very good. And it's very exciting to have somebody like Bayer join the arena.
Yeah, a large player like that, they must see some potential.
Hopefully. And as I see it, or as I understand it, their interest is mainly in winter Camelina.
So that's an interesting aspect too. People are always think spring seeded crops, but there are both spring and fall seeded Camelina varieties. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, so not only that, because you can seed spring Camelina in the fall. However, Camelina actually has two different biotypes. So the spring Camelina and the winter types. And these winter types, they are different from spring Camelina in that they require an extended period of cold, what we call vernalization, in order to actually trigger flowering. So it's seeded in the fall. It establishes before winter, then goes dormant over the winter. But what is unbelievable, it actually stays green over the winter, completely green. And then it gets going really early in the following spring. There it can take advantage of the moisture that comes through the snowmelt, and then it matures quite early. It's not rare that we harvest our winter camelina in July.
Should be a great cover crop. We talk about, keeping living roots as long as possible in the soil. The environmental benefits should be great with a winter camelina.
Yeah, absolutely. It has a lot of benefits that, any winter cover crop has, that takes up excess nitrogen, helps to prevent soil erosion, is a habitat for small wildlife. And it actually is also one of the earliest food sources for pollinators. Our winter camelina flowers around mid-May. And I always like to tease my other breeder colleagues because I take flowering notes and they're just seeding their crops, right? So it's a lot of fun. But that, like sometimes, the lilac flowers aren't even out, or the leaves aren't even out. So it's really, really neat. It's been really, really neat. Winter camelina has been a lot of fun to work with. It's incredibly winter hardy. It has about comparable winter hardiness to fall rye. So we've been growing it since 2016 in Saskatoon, and we've never had it fail. So right now it's the only winter oilseed crop that you can grow over the winter on our prairies. So it's exciting.
So is it difficult to tell if when you're looking at lines and you're looking to develop to know whether or not this variety requires fertilization or not? You've made some progress in that regard, I understand.
Yeah, so an easy way to tell it is if you just grow it in the greenhouse and then it doesn't flower, then okay, this is probably a winter type. But that doesn't work for us as a breeding program because we have to get as many generations through a greenhouse as possible. And what we found when we started to work breeding winter camelina is that, for one, the material that we get from other researchers and from the gene bank, well, half of the material wasn't winter, it was spring, and the other half was really a dog's breakfast of spring and semi-winter and winter types. And that's absolutely not a negative comment to the gene bank because that's their purpose, right? Their purpose is to provide genetically diverse material to researchers and others. But it certainly made our work much more difficult. And the other thing is that the number of winter type lines that are out there in the world is much, much lower than the number of spring types. And because we had already done quite a bit of breeding work in spring camelina and had developed a number of nice traits like larger seeds and certain fatty acid profiles, we right away started to cross the spring types with the winter types to bring those traits from the spring cultivars into the winter genetics. And as you can imagine, the offspring of that, again, is all over the place, right? So our early generations, we grow in the greenhouse, and anything that we suspect to be a winter type is exposed to vernalization. So, and we thought, well, the spring types will probably behave differently, either in vernalization or once we take the plants out of vernalization. They might bolt earlier or flower earlier. Well, we were totally wrong. They all looked the same. So we couldn't actually tell which one was a winter or a spring type. And also, even the spring type is so winter hardy that certain spring type varieties would probably survive every other winter in Saskatchewan. So we really needed a tool to help us tell early on whether a plant is a winter type or not, so that we can choose the right parents for our crosses. But also, once we have developed a winter variety, we can actually be for sure certain that it's a winter type. So we started a mapping project, and that had the goal to identify the genomic regions that are associated with that need for vernalization. And with the ultimate goal to develop molecular markers. Molecular markers are a really handy tool that breeders use nowadays. They're like tags or signposts within the DNA that are really closely associated to whatever trait you are interested in. So we set out, we identified the genomic regions, and we identified one particular gene that actually is well known in other plants to put a brake on flowering unless the plant is exposed to cold. And I'm just going to call it like the flowering brake gene. We identified these genes, and Camelina is really complicated. It's hexaploid like wheat, so it actually has 3 copies of each gene. Each gene has 2 versions, so it gets really complicated fast. But we identified the different versions of these 3 genes. We developed our molecular markers. That was great, but one of the results that was really unexpected was that when we look at the spring types, and we look at the different versions of these 3 genes, the spring types almost all look the same. They are completely behaving the same. However, when we look at the winter types, I had already earlier spoken about the phenotypic diversity, but even if the phenotype is a clear winter type, the genetics are really heterogeneous. So different versions of the 3 genes can actually lead to the winter type. And that was surprising because evolutionarily, I would have expected that the winter, the cold, put such a strong selection pressure on the winter types that you would end up with something that's genetically very homogeneous. But it's not. And I have to admit, I haven't come up with a hypothesis for that, why that makes sense. Certainly it makes sense because nature never does anything, for no good reason. So we are still working on that. And that has also opened up the door for us to potentially develop different winter type cultivars that are better suited to different winter environments. Like we have a very, very harsh winter. But south of the border with milder winters, there people are really, really interested in winter types that are flowering very, very early because they're interested in cropping scenarios like relay and double cropping. So their early flowering, early maturity is really, really important. So now we are in a position where we are working on figuring all that out and keep working. But now at least we are in a position where we can make good choices in terms of our parents, or at least we know what we're dealing with, and develop the winter cultivars.
So you've mentioned a number of the breeding objectives, but just run through the objectives both for spring and winter varieties.
Yeah, so generally they are quite similar for both, right? I mean, as a breeder, we always look at what does the producer need and what does the processor need. So and that then becomes our breeding objective. And I mean, first and foremost, get the yield up and or oil yield per hectare, like close that yield gap to other crops. That's really important also for the sustainability of the crop. We have to get the yield up. We are working on larger seeds. As I had already mentioned before, Camelina has fairly small seeds. They are about the size of alfalfa seeds, and that can be challenging for seeding, for harvesting, and for crushing the seed. We've made good progress on that. And so herbicide tolerance is important for the crop, but that is really more industry's portfolio. They are working on that. We have been working on disease resistance because despite the fact that Camelina has resistance to a lot of diseases and pests, there are a few that do bother the crops. So we've been working on downy mildew resistance, and that's really the most important disease right now. We've made good progress on that. Clubroot resistance, we are working on that, which is a bit of a longer term goal. And, we always look for shadow resistance, things like lodging. Yeah, but those would be the main things that we're currently working on.
Do you have many colleagues around the world that are working on Camelina, or do you feel like you're a bit of an island?
Well, I did feel like an island until summer of last year when I co-organized and attended the first International Camelina Conference, which was held in Nebraska. And all of a sudden, I was sitting in a room with 150 other people that were as excited about Camelina as I was. So that was very neat. Certainly, I would say in Canada, I'm more of an island than globally. There are people in other places in the world that are quite excited about the crop and are doing good work on it.
How long have you been working on Camelina?
So I've been working on Camelina since I came to Canada in 2008. So I came here as a postdoc to the lab of Jeanette Singen-Swartz, and she said, well, you have to work on Camelina in pathology. So And so I did. I worked on sclerotinia in Camelina, and then I got an offer to work for Linnaeus Plant Sciences as their Camelina breeder, and I was in the lucky position that I at the same time worked still as a visiting scientist at AFC, which really allowed me to still be involved in the research. And then about 8 years ago, I got the job as the research scientist at AFC. And I continue working with Camelina. So I don't know. That's 15 plus years.
That's great.
Mm.
Now, what variety names would producers recognize out there? Noel is one of the winter ones that might be pretty prevalent?
Well, no. That was our latest creation. That's actually not out there.
Oh, that's not out there yet.
And the name Noel came from, so currently the most commonly grown winter variety is Joel. And so we did some work on Joel because we and also growers realized that it was quite heterogeneous in the field and they didn't really like it. So we cleaned up the genetics. And because that work was completed around Christmas time, we termed this breeding line Noel. No, it would certainly be Joel on the winter side. On the spring side, it's varieties, an old one from AFC is Midas that people would be familiar with. Camelina, Blaine Creek, those varieties. One came from the US, the other one from Austria. Right now, New Gold is one that is most commonly grown, which is the herbicide-tolerant spring variety.
So Noel is something you hope to bring out as a variety, is that right?
Yes, that along with a few other ones. Noel is one of the cultivar candidates that is currently in the testing phase. So we are growing it in replicated yield trials in Saskatchewan, and the results so far have been very, very promising, whereas a number of the candidates have considerably higher yields than Joel. And have been doing really well, particularly last winter or last year. You may remember that we had a very, very dry spring and very dry early summer. Like, we could have not seeded our spring crops if we would have not irrigated. And, the winter Camelina was completely fine. It was very, very short. It would maybe just go up to your knees, but it was filled with pods. And our highest yielding entries were still 46 bushels per acre. Like on that little rain, it was really amazing. So that's exciting. You always need a few years of variety testing before you can really be sure. You can never really be sure, right? You have to grow it in a farmer's field to be sure, but at least to have like a good idea of how it's going to perform. So that's going to come down the pipe in a few years.
Do you think that the winter varieties will probably be the mainstay, or do you think it'll evolve that there's a mix of spring and winter out there?
Well, I really don't know. Those things, I have very little influence over. It's really in the end up to industry to see what they make out of it. I'm hoping that both will stay and grow, because both of them, have their own benefits and are really complementary.
So how significant do you think Camelina could become in the years ahead?
Again, I don't know. And I can't say, depends on industry, depends on really like the market conditions, depends on the crushing capabilities, on the maybe the willingness of the refineries to take Camelina oil. And, one most important factor is, well, how much are the companies going to pay the farmers to grow the crop? Is it going to be profitable for them? What I wish for is that Camelina transitions from a niche crop to, a real crop like mustard or flax. And that's what I'm hoping for. And with the recent purchase of the Smart Earth program by Bayer, another development is that another small Saskatchewan company, Year 10, was bought by New Farm. So now we have both Bayer and New Farm, plus Sustainable Oils, which is a very old company from the States, has expanded into Canada. So with that development, I really, really hope that transition is actually going to be possible, because we need those big industry players to be involved.
Christina Eynck, pleasure visiting with you, and all the best in your work with Camelina.
Thank you so much. Same to you.